I was shocked that those were not the dancers that my eye was going towards on the stage. Hey dancers, it's Kirsten. Welcome back to the Confident Dancer YouTube channel. Today I want to lean in on some of my reflections on what it was like to be in a professional company about 5 years ago when I was still dancing full-time. And I want to share with you guys things no one told me about being in a company that I soon discovered once I got into one. And I want to share this with you so that you can, of course, prepare yourself to thrive if that's the path you want to take. Okay, so number one, your insecurities don't just magically go away with a contract. Of course, logically, we all understand that, but I feel like emotionally, there's kind of this vision that dancers have growing up that once you just pass that huge milestone of getting a contract, then since it seems that so many of your insecurities were related to whether or not you'll get the contract, then when you actually do, it seems like, oh, so the insecurities are irrelevant, right? Wrong, sadly. As much as I wish they would just go away for all of us, we still do have our own responsibility to do our own internal work, to work on our own confidence, our self-worth, our self-esteem, our insecurities and our fears. It's up to us to work on that, and no title, status, or achievement will just take that away from you. So just a healthy reminder to do that internal work on your own or with the help of someone like me, a mindset coach for dancers. That's definitely what I'm here to help dancers with. And part of what inspired me to get into this work is just seeing how much our own mentality as dancers often gets in our way of enjoying our own journey, dancing our personal best, and really feeling like we actually achieved or fulfilled our potential. I just wanted to make this help accessible to help dancers actually get the tools to build confidence, overcome performance anxiety, work through self-doubt and insecurities, so that no matter if you get a contract or not, or whatever's happening in your company, you can still have the level of confidence and mental well-being that you want. So if that's something you're interested in, links below to my website. You can learn more about how we can work together and sign up for a free consultation where we can chat and see if working together would be a good fit. Second, I didn't really understand how helpful it is to actually be very business-minded as a dancer. Like, understand that the directors really enjoy working with people generally. These are all generalizations. They enjoy working with people who get down to business, like just go in, do the job, do the work, put in the full effort, just do it efficiently, do it well. So that's kind of like oh, duh. But what I mean by that is actually a lot of dancers, myself included, a lot of us are used to coming from our pre-professional student school environments before we get into a company. And those tend to be a lot more nurturing, a lot more like, okay, let's talk through corrections, let's talk through feedback. And we can get used to sometimes working at a slower pace, and to also have a lot more discussion and thinking whenever we're a student, because, we're processing corrections, we're talking with our teachers, or, receiving comments from them. And there can be, again, this is a generalization, but there can be a lot more like pausing and thinking in our pre-professional training. But then when you actually get into a company, this is actually what I loved about it. It's like, we're just down to business. Like, you do class, and a lot of times the directors don't stop for a lot of chit chat or correcting. Like, you're just doing the combinations. And so one of my favorite things was actually taking class with the company I was with every day, because we would just do class and we would get so much more done and get through so many more combinations, and I felt like I was really in a flow and I was getting a really good workout. Instead of when I was in a pre-professional school, there was so much like stopping to talk and to practice and implement corrections and all that. I felt like I wasn't able to dance to my fullest potential because we weren't just like continuing to sweat and getting in the flow of actually doing the movement. And so I actually noticed that I improved a lot after I got into the company, because we were just working and we were just doing, not just like talking and thinking. Although obviously when teachers talk and you're thinking about things, you're also supposed to be trying. And yes, I would always like take the correction and practice it, but that's still not the same as like being in the flow and just doing the combinations. But also that feeds into your mentality. When you're in rehearsals all day in a professional company, since time is of the essence in a company, and a lot of times there isn't a lot of time, the directors really need to get down to business, and they want to work with dancers who are ready to do the same. So like, put your head down, do the work, show up. If they need a spot filled, go in and like fill it. Like, like be attentive to the needs of the company and what is going to help the company rise faster to the best end result on the stage. And alongside that, the no excuses thing has really been big in companies. Now, I want to say there's some nuance on that. Obviously, this can be taken to such a toxic level that I really don't approve of at all, which is like, you cannot be a human being at all. Oh, your leg is falling off? No excuses. That just means personal weakness. Oh, I bet you just didn't warm up well enough once. That's why you busted your ACL. It's all your fault. Like, obviously, that could be taken to such an extreme that it's ridiculous. And it's like such a shaming mindset to have. And so when I say no excuses, if you are in a company or with a teacher who treats every conversation you have with them about like a legitimate injury recovery plan or something like that, if they're treating it like an excuse and shaming you for experiencing that, which I know is very sadly common, I really experienced that and it was awful. So I do not condone that literally whatsoever. I rebuke that, absolutely not. But on the other hand, there is definitely something that I noticed when I was watching some peers in my company where I would notice some of maybe the more junior dancers would be very quick to, instead of just receiving a correction and like just doing it better next time, they would be like, oh, yeah, that happened because this, because blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, we get it. Like, this is harsh, but it's like irrelevant. Okay, let's just like do it and move on. Like, so just to be able to be like, okay, received, do it next time, instead of like generating a story of like, this is why I couldn't, unless it's a genuine thing like, hey, actually I wasn't able to get to that spot on time because we're having a formation issue. Can we talk through that? That's a different thing. So we're in, I'll lead to that in my next point. But yeah, generating stories, I'll say, explanations, things that can come off as excuses rather than just being like, okay, I'll do that better next time. Or, okay, actually I need to talk with you about this so that I could do it better next time. It just slows the company down so much and it's really frustrating for a director to work with that. And so that's just something that's really good to know, because sometimes in school environments, I find that is that mentality of like, oh, I need to share with my teacher more of like why that didn't work. That tends to be more excusable sometimes in a school, but in a company that just does not fly because there's not time for it. The next thing that is kind of related to my last point is communication, and knowing how to communicate well is such a valuable skill. And a lot of times in schools, they just don't teach you that. They don't necessarily teach you how to ask thoughtful, smart questions, or when to know, like when that's more of an inside question, like you turn to your peer in the half second you have off and be like, okay, what do we do about that? Instead of like bringing it to the director all the time. But more often than not, I always notice dancers like having legitimate question, but feeling too scared to speak up for whatever reason. Sometimes it's not their fault. Sometimes the director is just like really scary to work with. And sometimes they like lash out when you ask questions, which is really terrible. Thank God I did not feel like that was the case in my company. But yeah, sometimes it is just a dancer is needing to work on their own confidence and using their own voice and being bold. And that's why they don't ask questions. And it would actually be really helpful if they asked a question, because they have a question that everyone else is thinking in the corps de ballet. And it's kind of like, okay, if someone actually said it, that would be awesome. So communication is so helpful. Like if you know how to do it well, that's such an asset to you in the company. And that can look like asking a question about formations, timing, choreography, especially when you're in the corps de ballet, especially if you notice your peers are kind of confused about it too and no one has the answer. Being the dancer who can respectfully and very much in a focused professional way say, we have this question over here, can we look at this? What angle of the head and the eyes do you want when we do this pose? There are many times where they don't specify a detail that's important just because they've got a lot going on and it's like just slip their mind for a second. It is a collaborative process that's needed to get to a good end product on the stage. So knowing how to communicate for yourself well and ask good questions, efficient questions. By the way, I have some videos on how to communicate well, how to ask for advice, how to talk to your director, how to have a tough conversation with your teacher. I'll try to link some of those in the cards, but you could definitely scroll through my video library. I for sure have some on communication. And I also will say it's not just about asking questions. It's about in your meetings with your director, asking for the information that you want and need, advocating for yourself. That is super important. And I do have a video on advocating for yourself, so I will link that as well. Another thing I didn't know before I got into a company is that as a student, our values of what we prioritize can be quite different than what a professional company prioritizes. And so what I learned is that consistency is really, really important, and maybe even more important than being like the flashy, perfect, best dancer. From my experience, what I noticed is that every season, a new batch of dancers would come in. The really flashy ones with the super crazy long legs and the feet and the extensions and the turns and the body, whatever, they would get attention right off the bat. It would be like, oh, who is this dancer? And then I would see the director like try to interact with them to see if, you know, they could have a good working relationship. And a lot of times what I noticed, not always, but a lot of times what I noticed is by the end of the season, or about midway through, a lot of the super flashy dancers were not the ones who were getting the attention, getting the roles, and getting the contracts towards the middle of the season. Why? Because there would always be some underdogs. And when I'm saying underdogs, I mean the dancers who maybe like when they're just standing still, you would be like, oh my gosh, the ballet body, like, oh my gosh, whatever. Like they weren't super flashy, but it was the dancers who were super consistent in their performance. Like they would be very reliable to know the choreography. They would be very reliable to be able to step in and understudy when there was need. They would be very reliable to have like a pretty consistent level of performance every day, so that when there was a mistake, it was like, oh yeah, we know that's a fluke. We know we can trust you to figure that out. Because of course, every single dancer makes mistakes. So consistency isn't about 100% all the time, because no one's going to give 100% perfection all the time. It's just about having a pretty good average. Versus some of the flashier dancers, what I noticed as a theme is a lot of those dancers are used to being like the creme de la creme, like the star student at their school before they got here. They're used to the attention. They're used to being fed lead role opportunities all the time that naturally cause them to have to work hard to do the role. Again, this is a generalization, but generally what I saw is those dancers would get into a company and they would have this mentality of like, oh yeah, good roles just happen to me. And they wouldn't have that internal motivation to push themselves, to drive themselves, even when no one is watching and they're in the back of the core. I noticed they were more prone to having that attitude of like, oh, it's just a quarter ballet role, instead of like, this is a role in a professional company. I'm grateful to be here. I'm going to make the most of it. Like they wouldn't always have that drive, or sometimes they would be a little bit more flaky or present a lot more like emotion in the job rather than just being like down to the bottom line, super focused, reliable. So reliability and consistency mentally and physically in how you show up in the job is really valuable. Another thing is that the people who stand out in the studio are not always the people who stand out on stage. That was a huge surprise to me. And here's how I learned that. My second season, I was supposed to be in Swan Lake, first cast, yay, so excited. And then I laugh now. There were a lot of tears. It was actually a very sad time. I had a knee injury. I had to get knee surgery. And so obviously no Swan Lake for me. But I decided to go to all 4 of the performances that the company did and the dress rehearsals. And when I was watching the rehearsals and the performances, I was really surprised that the dancers who I knew from watching them from behind or from the side in the studio, I knew that they usually stood out in the studio as being really, really good dancers. I was shocked that those were not the dancers that my eye was going towards on the stage. There were these dancers that honestly in the studio didn't seem super flashy or eye-catching compared to the rest, but on the stage they had a certain quality that was kind of that je ne sais quoi, you know, like you couldn't really put a finger on it, but it was like this presence, like the way that they presented themselves really translated well on the stage. My takeaway from that was like the dancer's favorite is not necessarily going to be the director's or the people's favorite, because we have a totally different vantage point. So that was just a really interesting thing that I wish I knew, because it kind of would have gotten me out of my head more of like, why is that person getting picked, blah, blah, blah. Versus like, maybe it would have been more productive for me to think, how am I presenting myself on the stage? I would have probably taken more initiative to have a friend film from the audience in a rehearsal on stage so that I can see how I was coming off and giving myself feedback on that. So that would have been super helpful if I knew that. One of the last things I'll say is that also confidence goes such a long way. I thought it was all about the technique, technical excellence and perfection. But what I ended up finding out is that having that attitude and the energy of healthy, authentic confidence really stands out in a room of dancers. And dancers, like, we tend to be very self-critical. We tend to be very inward and maybe tearing ourselves down sometimes, or going into a spiral of negative thoughts and feelings about our own performance. And that kind of causes the lights to dim in our eyes. Like, we kind of go more inward. So even physically, a dancer who is present and who doesn't have an ego, they don't have a lot of self-consciousness, they're just there to do the job and they know what they have to offer, and they're not arrogant, but they're just confident and grounded in who they are and what they have to offer. They're present. That honestly really stands out, and it's great to work with, because the director also knows that they can be frank in their communication with that person, not in a rude way, but they can work with that person and they know that that dancer will receive the feedback well and implement it, rather than taking everything so personally and like going in this spiral. I noticed that sometimes the directors I would work with, I could tell that they knew which dancers would take feedback really hard, and then it would feel, I saw that complicated, like that complication going on the inside of them of like, can I say what I mean, or is it going to make you cry and like run out of the room, And so confidence goes a really, really long way, and it also helps you to present yourself as your best every day. So super important to work on your confidence. Okay, dancers, I think that is enough for one video. I hope you really enjoyed it. Let me know which one of these surprising things that I learned surprised you the most. I'd love to know in the comments. So drop a comment, subscribe if you haven't already. I hope to see you in next week's video, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.